Hello and welcome to Real Opinions, and today I'm going to be reviewing Fede Alvarez, I think it's Fede Alvarez, new film Don't Breathe. So Don't Breathe is set in Detroit, where three youngish people named Rocky, Alex, and Money are basically going on like a burglarizing spree. They each have different reasons for doing it. Rocky, the only female member of the group, is basically trying to escape from a broken home and take her little sister with her because the mother's fairly abusive and she lives with her douchebag boyfriend. So she wants to get away from that, and burglarizing is the only way she can seem to do it. There's Alex, who is played by that guy who looks exactly like Logan Lerman, Dylan Minnette, and he's kind of friend-zoned by Rocky, but he goes along with it basically for her, and he's the one whose dad works for the security company, so that's how they get into these houses, because he knows about all the alarms and everything. And then there's Money, the sort of stereotypical crazy one, and also Rocky's boyfriend. And basically, they kind of come across what could be their one last job, stealing physical money from a blind man, which is a big difference for them because they've always stolen things that they then sell. But stealing money, kind of basically makes it a worse crime with a potentially worse sentence. So, but it's the last job, so they're going to risk it. They're going to steal, I think it was $300,000 in this house that in which an old man lives, who it turns out is blind. He was given a settlement. That's where this money came from, and they assume that money is in the house. They do sort of say, let's just run with it. Hopefully the money's in the house. They break in, and you've seen the trailers by now. It quickly transpires that this blind man isn't a saint and also is quite dangerous. And what follows is basically a home invasion film with a twist, in that you're supposed to be feeling for the home invaders as they are pursued through this house, locked in and stalked by this blind guy. So that's the basic setup. It's very, very similar to another film called Wait Until Dark, but here it's flipped, so that the threat is actually from the blind person whose home is being broken into. So it's directed, as I said, by Fede Alvarez, who made the Evil Dead remake, which, as anyone who watches the channel knows, Ben loves. He named it one of his favourite remakes, and I quite like it too. So I was quite excited for this film. Decent premise, great director, or potentially great director. And then it got good reviews, and I'm like, oh good, I want to see a horror thriller that might actually be good for once. God knows we don't get enough of them. And this film is really good. It's a really good film. I really, really enjoyed it. It's very much in the vein of Panic Room and films like that, in that it doesn't necessarily have a big message or important theme or anything. There's not a great purpose to it. It is just an entertaining, restrained thriller. It doesn't really ever have a big twist or do anything more than the setup sort of requires it to do. It just sort of, here's the simple idea, we're going to do that, but we're going to do it really well. And luckily, they execute it more than well enough. For a start, I think it does a really good job of sort of playing with your sympathies, because as I said, on one hand, you've got three burglars, one of whom is a dangerous lunatic, or potentially a dangerous lunatic. To be fair, he doesn't actually really do anything that bad, but one of them's a douchebag at least. So you've got those three, but then within that group, Rocky and Alex are kind of sympathetic characters. They have motivation for why they're doing this, at least. And on the other hand, you have a blind man, a blind war vet who's lost his child. You should be sympathizing with him. He's the one whose home's being broken into. But he's a lunatic, and as the film goes on, it reveals more and more about him, and it keeps you on your toes, and eventually, I would admit, it would have maybe been more interesting if I didn't know who to sympathize with, and if I was kind of bouncing back and forth, but I would say that you almost throughout are siding against the blind man because he's a psychopath. It maybe would have been more interesting, and maybe would have pushed this up from great to fantastic if you kind of going back and forth, but as it stands, I thought it did a good job of establishing these characters. I cared about them. They weren't amazing characters or anything. They weren't the most deep or complex, but they did what they needed to for this, 90-minute runtime to get me to invest in them. I liked Rocky. I wanted it to make it through, but at the same time, they had their flaws. They definitely had their flaws, and they felt complex enough and compelling enough for me to actually care about what happens to them, which doesn't happen with a lot of these modern horror films. The big draw is mainly the way that they do these inventive set pieces revolving around the fact that the blind man can't see but has heightened other senses, and there's lots of moments where they do kind of clever things with that. In particular, there's the big one that you've seen in the trailers where they go into the basement and he turns off the lights and he goes into kind of fake night vision, and it's very, very cool, very suspenseful. And there are a lot of moments in this film where I was on the edge of my seat, and there have been other films like this year. Like, the one that jumps to my mind, I haven't seen Green Room, but Green Room would jump to my mind, is 10 Cloverfield Lane, which a lot of people said was really suspenseful. I thought this was much more suspenseful than 10 Cloverfield Lane. I thought this was a much more intense, like, film set restrained in one location, because there were several moments where I was just either waiting for the loud noise that was inevitably going to come, but then importantly, they're not jump scares. You know the loud noise is going to come because it's set up that way. It's not a jump scare. There aren't really many jump scares in this. Or I was just waiting for someone to get caught or for someone to die. It was very, very, very... because I was invested, I was intense. I found it intense, and I found it almost unbearable to watch. Particularly because there is one element of this film that anyone who actually knows me personally will know would scare the hell out of me. And it's very central to a few of the set pieces in this film. And those bits I found really unpleasant to watch because I have a personal fear of this particular thing. I won't spoil it, but it made it very, 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 very difficult for me, but in a good way. The cinematography is excellent. It's one of the best looking horror films I've seen in a long time. It's very much riffing on the Panic Room style, particularly. I know Chris Stuckman pointed this out, but I'm not ripping off Chris Stuckman and saying this because it's so blatant. It does the exact same opening thing as Panic Room when they break in and the camera goes through all the floorboards and shows you the whole geography of the house. It works. It's a good way of establishing where certain rooms are, where certain key items are. It does its job, and I know why they do it, but you do sit there going, oh, you're really going to do that much of Panic Room. The music, I really liked the music, actually. There were a couple of moments where it kind of goes a little overboard with the whole, like, boom, 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 kind of to make it more intense. And it did, but there were moments where I was like, they're just walking to the house. You don't need to, like, it's nothing's happening yet. But that was fine. There is a thing towards the end of the film that a lot of people have commented on as either being unnecessary or out of place. I personally thought it was neither. Maybe it was a bit unnecessary, but I thought, like, just around that exact point, I was starting to think, this is getting a bit repetitive now. And then it introduces this element, and you know what, I appreciate it being there. It is only really going to bother you if you're one of those people who is very easily offended by stuff in films, I think. Because this is a nasty horror film with morally ambiguous, well, I'll say morally ambiguous, morally bankrupt characters for the most part. Some nasty stuff's gonna happen, and I don't want it to be sanitized and to be, made as inoffensive as possible. If I wanted a sanitized, inoffensive film, I'd go watch Kubo and the Two Strings, or I'd go rewatch the BFG, or whatever. This isn't for you if you're going to get upset about certain things. I don't know. I had absolutely no issue with it. One thing I really wanted to talk about, actually, was the performances, which is rare. I don't think you leave many horror films going, I want to talk about the performances, unless they're really, really bad. They're good here. Stephen Lang, who plays the blind man, he gives a very, very kind of intimidating performance, mainly through the physicality. Like, I was genuinely kind of a bit on edge whenever he was around. He doesn't speak much. When he does, though, you feel the kind of pain in his voice about the things that he's lost and the things that he's done. So I thought he was a good villain, and I thought Stephen Lang really, really brought some proper menace and also vulnerability to that role. I thought he did a good job. The guy who played the Logan Lerman, Dylan Minnette, or whatever his name is, he's solid. The crazy guy's solid too. But the main person that I want to talk about was Jane Levy, who plays Rocky. She's pretty great, considering she doesn't have, like, a role that requires her to do that much. She really... she does scared in a very convincing way. It's not movie scared. You know, it's not like a girl who's trying to look scared but still be as pretty and Hollywood beautiful as normal. Like, she looks terrified, particularly in that bit where they go into the dark room. It really was abject terror on her face. Like I said, she's not got a complex character or anything. It's not like she brings to life this really nuanced character and plays with all these different emotions and themes. I'm just saying she does scared really, really well. And when I was watching this, I was thinking, oh, this really puts to shame a lot of the other horror films where they just look movie scared. Because she really, really did. Because of her performance, I felt more scared too. I felt scared along with her. My only major issue with the film is to do with they're kind of two issues, but I would sort of group them together. Is that number one, as I said, it never really goes above and beyond its premise. It sticks to it, and I kept waiting for a twist or for something new to happen, but it kind of just did what it needed to do, and I kind of was hoping it might transcend that with something else, or just a moment that you could leave talking about, like the kind of water cooler moment of the film that would become iconic. There was nothing like that, and equally I felt like it kind of just sort of ended. It ended in the kind of way where if I was writing this movie, this would be my placeholder first draft ending. Like the first thing that came to my mind. It might even be the first thing that comes to your mind if you're thinking of how this movie should be resolved, how the conflict should be resolved, because it was the first thing that came to my head. And it would be the thing that I would write as in the first draft, but would hopefully come up with a better idea later. It's not a bad ending. It's just a very kind of like, yep, there you go. It's fine. And then it tags on an extra bit at the end that, I don't know, it felt like it was meant to be a sequel setup, but at the same time, it didn't really do that. It was a very odd ending. It was like, when horror movies end with but this kind of just ended with maybe we'll come back. I don't know. Oh, it's hard to, obviously, without spoiling, to say the nature of this ending, but it was very peculiar in that it didn't seem to fully commit to its tag ending. Anyway, good film. Genuine. I enjoyed it throughout. Technically, it's one of the best made horror films I've seen in a long time. Acting's great. Direction's great. I did like that Fede Alvarez is doing new things, because this isn't very gory. I mean, you think about Evil Dead, that was a properly brutal, gory shockfest, and here there's not that much gore, so he goes for tension instead. He's done something new. I liked it. I would even say I really liked it. I didn't love it, but I would thoroughly recommend it, and it's the kind of film that I could recommend to almost anyone. That's, I think, what I would say, unless you're maybe really sensitive to controversial issues, but I would say that it is the kind of film where I can't imagine anyone saying they were bored or that they thought it was bad. It's just a very solid thriller, and I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10.